Hello, we are live. Hi, I'm Tris. I'm just going to give it a few minutes for people to join in and just give some time for everyone to join in before we start a gluten-free cookie recipe, little cooking demo that I'm going to do. And also feel free to ask any questions and I can answer them as we go along. So I will just give it a few minutes. Hello, if you've just joined, welcome. I'm Tris. If you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat and I will have a look at those. Otherwise, please feel free to say hello. Let me know where you're from, what your, whether you're working with some intolerances or allergies. All right. I might get started soon. This will be recorded as well, so you'll be able to go back through the group and rewatch it if you want to watch the cooking demo or have a look at any of the questions that were asked that I can talk you through. So just to give you a little intro, my name's Tris. I am a health coach and student nutritionist. So I work in an area of nutritional medicine or clinical nutrition. So we work with looking at how the body works holistically, working with people to do dietary and lifestyle and sometimes supplementation suggestions and advice to help them with any symptoms or conditions they're managing, for disease prevention and just with optimizing nutrition and health overall. I really love cooking as well. I'm gluten-free, so I predominantly cook gluten-free and I share a lot of gluten-free recipes on a blog and website that I have, so Tris Alexandra Nutrition. So I love sharing lots of different recipes and wellness and nutrition articles and advice on there as well. And Lauren's just joined as well. Hello. Hi everyone, please feel free to ask any questions as I go along. So I'm going to be cooking a gluten-free cookie recipe with you guys tonight. And you can cook along with me. I think the ingredients were shared a couple of posts back. Otherwise I'll take you through the ingredients as we go. Now I do have my oven on 170 degrees Celsius, just preheating. And I've got all my ingredients out, which I'll take you through. Just to give you a little bit of intro as well, so I do, as I was saying, I do predominantly have a gluten-free diet. So I have a gluten intolerance. I also carry a celiac gene. Just give me one moment. Sorry, my little dog was just my big dog was just at the door wanting to go outside. So as I was saying, so I am predominantly, so I have a gluten-free diet. I am gluten intolerant. I do carry a celiac gene as well. So I do stick to a gluten-free diet for that reason. I do sort of, as a lot of you would experience, have experienced as well, I do get some symptoms, digestive symptoms, and a lot of really sort of vague other symptoms that I get when I have had gluten in my diet. And so I found it took me some time to work out that I had a gluten intolerance because my symptoms were quite vague. I had a lot of fatigue, a lot of skin and hormonal issues, and it kind of took time because I wasn't necessarily getting obvious digestive symptoms all the time. So I know that some of you might have experienced those kind of things as well, where it's kind of taken time to find out what you are intolerant to, or what if you've had any sort of allergies and intolerances. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to share. Let me know where you're from, and yeah, I'll get started. So I'll just see if you can, I'll just tilt my camera a little bit so you can see what I've got down here a little bit better. Now, the cookie recipe I'm going to take you through, it's really easy. I probably don't need to show you that. It's really just a few ingredients that you can put together. You can use it as a base recipe as well, so you can add some things into it. If you want to add some like dark chopped chips, or if you want to add some nuts, if you are tolerant to nuts, you can add a few other bits and pieces into them. What I love about having these kind of quick, healthy, simple recipes on hand is that you can just whip them up quite quickly. You don't then have to rely on buying, I guess, or looking for gluten-free options of packaged foods, which is sometimes hard to get. Not always, you know, that exciting, but there's lots of options for making delicious gluten-free food. I'm really big on whole foods, so trying to do a lot of home cooking and using predominantly whole foods or cooking from scratch. I think it's a great way to add in, you know, additional nutrients into your food as well. So that's why I love having these kind of recipes. So to start with, I've got, now this recipe makes about 6 to 8 cookies depending on how big you want them. So 6 sort of medium size and 8 smaller cookies. You can double the recipe. If you've got a family especially, it's just me and my husband at home, so I tend to make smaller batches of things. So please feel free, if you're cooking along or if you're wanting to cook this recipe, you can double it and make a little bit more. So I've started off with half a cup of almond meal. I'm going to add, so I'm going to put all my dry ingredients together. So I've got almond meal, coconut, cacao powder, and some baking soda as my dry ingredients. I then, as wet ingredients, I've got melted coconut oil, which I've just melted. I've got an egg. You can substitute the egg if you're intolerant to eggs. You can use a flax egg or a chia egg. I've got tahini, a little bit of vanilla extract, and some maple syrup. And again, you can swap the maple for another liquid sweetener, rice malt syrup, honey, depending on your preferences. Oh, and Lauren's just shared the ingredients as well, thank you. So, half a cup of almond meal. I'm gonna go in with 1/4 cup of coconut. Now, if anyone remembers like the golden ruff chocolates, that's what these cookies kind of remind me of. Just 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. And then a heaped tablespoon of raw cacao, or cacao powder, cocoa powder, whatever you've got. So I put all my dry ingredients in one bowl. Now in another bowl, so I've just got all of those ingredients. In another bowl, I'm going to start with, I've got 2 tablespoons of coconut oil, and I've melted that as well, so 2 melted tablespoons. I'm going to do 3 tablespoons of maple syrup. 2 tablespoons of tahini. Again, you can substitute this for another. If you don't have any nut intolerances, you could use like another nut butter. Make sure it's runny though. The runniness gives these cookies like that nice texture and stops them from going dry. So like a nice runny nut butter would work. And then just a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now, if you're cooking along, I hope you will, well, I hope you're cooking along, that way you've got some cookies to have for after dinner tonight. So I'm going to mix those, before I add the egg, I'm actually going to mix that together first, just because I melted the coconut oil just before I jumped on this live, and if it's a little bit warm, I don't really want to put egg into warm coconut oil. It will start to cook it a little bit. So just stir that up really well until it's like nice and creamy. I'm going to pour that into the dry ingredients. And then going to just crack the egg and whisk that into the bowl I was just using. And I'll add that into my mixture as well. So as I said, really simple recipe. It's really great. I think it's really great that we can kind of cook up these really simple recipes that don't take long. Means you can have some snacks and desserts and things on hand quite easily, and you don't have to rely on those, you know, gluten-free packaged options. Not that all of them. I mean, some of them are really delicious, so I don't mean it in that way. All right, and then we're just going to mix that together. Now, if you've got the time, I find popping this, once you've mixed it together, popping the mixture in the fridge for like 10 minutes just sets that coconut oil and cools the coconut oil a little bit more, and it means that the mixture is a lot easier to dollop onto your baking tray. You don't have to, if you don't have the time, don't worry, you can just put it straight onto the baking tray. Now I'm going to make this into 8 cookies. They look quite small, but they do puff up when you cook them. So I'll show you, I made a batch earlier and I made 6 in this batch. So you can see that was the size with 6 cookies. So that's like the inside of them. So I'm going to make 8 this time, make them a little bit smaller. If anyone's got any questions, or if you just want to pop in and say hello, let me know what any food intolerances or allergies that you're working with, any questions you've got about cooking or baking with any allergies or intolerances. I find with gluten-free, when I've worked with people transitioning to a gluten-free diet, they've always quite often found they're so used to using ingredients and things that have, I mean, there's so many foods, like packaged foods and things that have gluten in them or have hidden glutens that we don't even realize. And so some people that I've worked with have found that quite challenging, and rightly so. And when they've when I've given them alternatives to swap to, it's just made it a lot easier, like realizing that there are other options to use. I know even with baking, I use like a range of different flours, so everything from buckwheat flour, quinoa, sorghum, what else do I use? I've been baking a gluten-free sourdough, so I started a gluten-free sourdough starter culture, and I bake a gluten-free sourdough, which is delicious, and it uses those flours, so sorghum, quinoa, sorghum, buckwheat, rice flour, and tapioca, and psyllium husk. And because that was probably one of the biggest things I missed being gluten-free, was having sourdough bread. Can you use either almond meal or almond flour? You probably could. I've used almond meal, and almond flour just has a little less texture, so you definitely could use that as well. It's still going to give you that. I think the almond meal and almond flour, because it's got that lovely almond healthy fats in it, it gives it that it gives the cookies that lovely like softness and richness, and stops them from drying out. So you could use either. Sway more on egg substitutes. Yeah, certainly. So I don't know whether you've tried like a chia or a flax egg. So what you would do is use, for 1 egg, you can substitute in baking a chia or a flax egg. So a flax egg is 1 tablespoon of flax seeds that you've ground, or a tablespoon of ground flax seeds. You add that to, I think it's 3 tablespoons of water. I would have to check that. If you Google flax or chia egg, I'm pretty sure it's 3. So 1 tablespoon of flax, 3 tablespoons of water. You mix that together and you let it sit, and the flax seed or the chia seeds will absorb the water and almost be like a gluggy kind of binding texture, and that's your binder basically for your baking. So you can substitute for each egg in a recipe, you could substitute a flax or a chia egg basically. So I hope does that make sense? I hope that helps. So I'm just gonna pop this mixture on my baking tray. Now these only take 10 minutes, so really, really quick. Now, as I said, probably a little bit easier if you refrigerate the mixture first. It just holds it together a little bit better. I melted this coconut oil quite a lot because I wanted to have it ready, so it's a little bit melted. But if you pop the mixture in the fridge for 5 or 10 minutes just to firm up, it's a lot easier to put it on the tray. It also means that the cookies are going to come out a little bit more, they don't flatten, they come out nice and puffed up. So I'm just going to get this into the oven, and then I will have a little look at your questions. And as I was saying before, if you want to add any dark chocolate chips or any other ingredients to this, you definitely could. All right, I'm just going to pop this in the oven. So 170 degrees Celsius for 10 minutes, that's it. When you take them out of the oven, they give them a couple of minutes and then cool them completely on a baking tray. They will be quite soft when you take them out, and then they firm up a little bit as they cool. So don't overcook them, like 10 minutes is plenty, and it'll keep them nice and soft. Questions? Oh, awesome. Margot says she'll be making these tomorrow. I love that. So while that's cooking, let me know if you've got any other questions. I think before I was talking about cooking gluten-free and baking gluten-free, so there's quite a range of substitutes for different gluten-free flours. When it comes to things like grains, I use a lot of rice, quinoa. I use buckwheat as a substitute for like an oat porridge. Now oats, a lot of people who are gluten intolerant find that they struggle to tolerate oats as well. And so I use a buckwheat to make porridge as an oat substitute, which is really delicious. Just trying to think of what other substitute I use. Swapping, okay, so for those who have nut allergies and intolerances, swapping, yeah, you can definitely swap an almond meal. I would use something like a quinoa flour or a buckwheat flour. You could substitute for almond meal. You may need to add a little bit more tahini just to give it, or a little bit more coconut oil just to give it a little bit more fats to keep it nice and moist. I tend to, when I bake things like banana breads or loaves, I tend to use a mix of flour. So I might use part buckwheat flour and part rice flour or part quinoa flour. Can use baking powder. Use a you can get gluten-free baking powder. So look for the gluten-free label on it. Does gluten-free flour work as well in general baking? It does. So you can either, for gluten-free baking, you can either buy a gluten-free plain flour, and it's typically a mix of flours. So they typically use like rice, maize, and there might be a couple of other flours in there, or you can mix up your own. So I tend to use a buckwheat or quinoa flour. They're quite dense, heavy flours, so I'll use part buckwheat or quinoa flour, and then I'll use part like a rice or tapioca flour. They're a lot lighter, they work a lot more like a plain flour, and they're probably your best options to use in baking. There are other flours as well, sorghum flour, that's another more heavy, dense flour like buckwheat. You can get teff flour as well. Teff is really great for making things like flatbreads, pancakes. It works well for those type of recipes. I probably should have looked at the time when I put those in too. But yeah, I think I showed you guys before, this is how the cookies come out. So I made 6 of these earlier on. So it tastes like that golden rough, like coconut chocolate kind of taste, and you can definitely add extra things in, choc chips, anything like that. Let me know if you've got any other questions. As I was sort of saying at the start as well, so I am gluten intolerant myself, and it took me quite a while to discover that I had this gluten intolerance. I had sort of different symptoms, systemic symptoms. I had fatigue and other not so obvious symptoms, and so it did take a bit of a process of finding out. What did you make a gluten-free starter out of? So the starter, when you make a gluten-free starter, you need to use half rice flour and half buckwheat or quinoa flour. Now the rice flour, it's just a white rice flour. That's actually what feeds the starter. So you use those 2 flours and water. I used, it wasn't my own recipe. There's a gluten-free and FODMAP cook, Georgia McDermott. She has a blog, George Eats. Now she has a gluten-free and FODMAP-friendly sourdough bread, and she shows you how to make the starter. So it is a little bit of a process to make your starter to begin with. It takes about a week to get the starter to develop, but it is totally worth it. The gluten-free bread, let me show you, I've got some. So I baked this yesterday, it's been half eaten, but this is my gluten-free sourdough. Now it doesn't get as much like the airy bubbles as a normal glutinous sourdough does, but it definitely tastes like it. It's absolutely delicious. And that, yeah, so that one is, it's got the darker color because I used a red sorghum flour in it. And that was where I got the recipe from. So it takes about a week to develop your starter, and you need to feed it every day. So you mix the flours with a little bit of water. You have to be quite accurate with the measurements. You leave it out on a bench covered, and that will start to feed and bubble, and it will start to develop. And then each day you take some out, add a little bit more flour, a little bit more water. You do that for about 7 days, and then it's ready to put in your fridge, and you need to feed it weekly. So every week I get my starter out, I feed it, and I use some of it to then make my sourdough bread. So totally, a little bit of effort, but totally worth it. So those cookies should not take long at all. But do let me know if you've got any other questions. Or let me know if you're working with any other food intolerances as well. My sister is protective over her starter, but we'll ask her to try and make a gluten-free one. Yeah, definitely worth it. It's the same process. It's just that you're using gluten-free flours, using a rice flour instead of a plain flour. Sourdough bread, the best for gluten intolerance? Yes. Some people, now this is not for celiac, so if those who are celiac have to have a strict gluten-free diet. If you are gluten intolerant and not celiac, you may find that you can tolerate small amounts of sourdough bread. The reason for that is that in the process of fermentation and the process of sourdough bread making, that fermentation process actually breaks down some of the gluten. So you find that you don't get as much digestive symptoms, because part of that those symptoms come because your body's struggling to digest gluten, and that has already occurred in the sourdough bread. And that's why some people with gluten intolerance find they can have a little bit. I personally found I could stomach sourdough bread. in small amounts. I didn't have any digestive symptoms, but I found if I was having it often, even a couple of times a week, I would start to feel a little bit fatigued and sluggish. And I just found, for me personally, I found just cutting it out completely was the best for me. But I definitely know there are people with gluten intolerance that can stomach sourdough bread. Do you do these cooking demos on a regular basis? I know that the Free From Plus Allergy community is sharing quite a few demos and having quite a few guests on board. So keep up, check out the community and keep up with what's going on there, and whether there's more cooking demos coming up. I haven't shared sort of any on my website on a regular basis. I do occasional lives on my Instagram on Tris Alexandra Nutrition. So I did one recently on meal prepping. So I'm really big on meal planning and prepping, because I find that it's a really great way of encouraging people and having like healthy meals throughout your week consistently, and it's just a really great way to learn how to have healthy ingredients on hand that you can whip up meals. So I do sometimes do cooking demos, but maybe I should do them more regularly if people are really enjoying the kind of live cooking demos. I'm just going to check these cookies. Okay, I might give them another minute, but this is how they will turn out. So give them a go. Definitely, like, I find it best to, as I was saying when I was making it, refrigerate the mixture for 5 or 10 minutes before you bake it, and just firms it up, and a lot easier to put it on the tray, and it keeps them together. The ingredients that I used in those quantities will make 6 to 8 cookies, but you can definitely double the batch. And I would definitely love to do another cooking demo. They're a lot of fun, so I hope you guys enjoyed that. Please let me know if you've got any more questions before I wrap up. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful night. Hope you get to do some baking tonight and enjoy some cookies. Do experiment, try different things in them. Let me know how you go. I'd love to kind of see your recipes and see how you went with it. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining in. It's always lovely. All right, hope to see you all again soon, and I'll see you in the community as well. So look forward to seeing all your posts and any questions that you've got, and I'll share a little bit more in there as well. So have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and I'll speak to you all soon. Thanks, guys.